Hi, and welcome to episode 5 in the IBM Connections Customizer series of enablement videos. If you've been following the series, you should know me from episode 1, but if you're just jumping in at this point, then allow me to introduce myself. My name is Martin Donnelly. I work as a software architect for IBM Collaboration Services out of the IBM Ireland lab. I am the technical lead for IBM Customizer, and I'm here today to help you with some customizer design properties that you may not have met before, but which can make your life easier when it comes to customizer deployment, testing, and development. So I'll explain these new properties, demonstrate how they can be used, and then we can talk about what's coming in the next series. So to quickly recap, from previous episodes you'd be familiar with generic app-reg design properties, things like type, which define the nature of the extension being implemented, and in our case, at least at present, they are always UI extensions, and also the generic path property, which helps customizer identify the application that is interested in customizing, be that communities, files, etc. Inside in the payload section though, you see these other properties, and they are specific to customizer itself. You would be familiar with the include files property because that is really the means of identifying the file, the primary file to inject. So some JavaScript file that's going to drive your customization. But there are other important properties that are there. So looking under the match category, which we will in a moment, there are a bunch of other values that you can specify. So things like URL, things like username, user email, and user ID. So let's see how to put those properties to work for us via a simple demo. In episode 1, we did an Hello World customization, which simply inserted this text into the home page. And if we were to look inside the debugger in the console window, I've been exploring some variables here earlier on, so you can see that there's an lcon.homepage and you can see there's a bunch of variables here that look reasonably interesting. User email, user extid, user name, and in this particular instance it retrieves my own name, Martin Donnelly here. So if that's accessible via a JavaScript variable, then maybe we can update our scripts to take advantage of that. If I go to Safari and go to, I have got another session open here as a different user, but I also have access to the actual source code. What I can do here is edit this file, and simply swap in, rather than doing a static hello world, we can swap in the dynamic JavaScript username as follows. So if I commit that change, you'd expect that my page will in fact be updated and display the name of the user dynamically rather than simply hello world. So here I go back, I get rid of my debugger and I refresh my page. Hello world becomes hello Martin Donnelly. So in Safari, hello world becomes hello John Snow. So clearly we have the capability of taking advantage of JavaScript variables that exist on a given page, and you'll see in a moment how we can also use that information inside an app-reg itself to be more targeted about our extensions. So here back in the application registry via the admin org extensions menu, I have opened the extension we looked at just a moment ago. You can see the only payload variable used here is the include files variable, and that simply says to inject the hello world.user.js JavaScript file that we examined briefly earlier. So let's take a scenario where I am developing an extension, but initially I want to restrict the audience, perhaps just to myself actually, rather than target the entire organization when I'm not quite ready to release the extension. So what I could do is take advantage of the match variable that is available here via the payload. If I were to extend the payload section and use the username that we saw just moments ago, username Martin Donnelly, then what am I really saying here? I'm saying, well, yes, inject this include file, but only if the username matches Martin Donnelly. So let's just see how that works. If I save and I go to the home page, and if I refresh it, then clearly my extension is still functioning. However, in Safari, I am logged in here as John Snow, and if I refresh this page, then the extension is simply not injected for John Snow. It previously was, but now we've added a match criteria, and that criterion says only inject this hello world.user.js JavaScript file if the username equals Martin Donnelly. John Snow clearly does not, so we've had the effect here of restricting the target audience to a particular user identified by username. So username is one match criterion, but there are others. We can use user ID, and in fact, just a moment ago, I used the same technique to retrieve the user ID for John Snow, and I can use that criterion instead. So here I would expect, given that I'm matching based on John Snow's user ID, that for myself, Martin Donnelly, that this extension will now go away if I visit the home page. And then, sure enough, I'm back to the original home page, and for John Snow, it's currently not there, but if I refresh and my user ID matches the injection, then the extension is in fact inserted and all is good. So we have a number of user-based criteria that can be applied at any given time, and that will help you target your extensions for different audiences, which is particularly useful, I think, in the testing and pre-deployment phase. So we've seen some of the user-based match criteria in operation, username, user ID, and they all work in the same way, basically a string comparison of a value against the username, etc. The URL, on the other hand, is not a straight string compare, it's a regular expression that is evaluated against the current URL. So let's look at the match URL criterion using the profile sample that you saw in episode 4. This is a sample that takes the standard profiles page that you're looking at now and transforms it to look like this. The main obvious change here is a big banner that's installed at the top of the page. So if we were to look at the design of this particular sample, you can see here that it's targeting profiles. Now what we can do is take a scenario where you want your extension to target more than one path, in which case you can use a special global keyword here, and that will cause Customizer to inject this particular customization for every path, which might also not quite be what you want. So you could do a secondary refinement, if you like, and say, you know, return this, but only when the URL that I'm actually processing is as follows. So here we can use a regular expression. We can say homepage or profiles. So when I save this, I would expect that visiting the home page would have a banner inserted, which it does, as you can see here, and that's also true when I go to my profile. So as you can see, having a regular expression that can be used to match against the current URL request is a very powerful capability. So what's coming next? Episode 6 will be presented by Stefano Pogliani. He's going to talk about how he's used Customizer to address real customer use cases, and that includes how to share content with external people and how to affect the UI around commenting, downloading and liking of files and connections. So watch this space. Thank you very much for viewing episode 5, and we look forward to seeing you in future episodes.